Today we're going to dive into something that sounds, well, just plain wrong. A deep, weird paradox right at the heart of how our minds work. It suggests that we're not always trying to run away from suffering. In fact, sometimes we actually choose more of it. So let's figure out why on earth that is. I mean, seriously, think about it for a second. If you had to repeat one of two painful things, would you ever pick the one that lasted longer and involved more total pain? It sounds completely absurd, but what if I told you that most people, when they're actually faced with this exact choice, do exactly that? Okay, so this brings us to a really famous experiment by the psychologist Daniel Kahneman. He had people go through two different trials. In the first one, they had to stick their hand in painfully cold 14-degree water for a full minute. Pretty straightforward, right? Unpleasant, but simple. Then, in the second trial, they did the exact same thing, but with an extra 30 seconds tacked on at the end, where the water warmed up by just 1 degree. Still really cold, definitely not comfortable, just a tiny bit less awful. And here is the absolutely bizarre result. When he asked them which trial they'd be willing to repeat, almost 70% of people chose the longer one. You know, the one with 30 extra seconds of pain. Logically, this makes zero sense. They experienced more total discomfort, and yet they preferred it. So what is going on here? Well, the first clue to solving this mystery lies in a pretty strange idea, that you aren't just one single you. According to Kahneman, we all have two different selves inside our heads, and they're often fighting for control. So let's meet your two selves. First up, you've got the experiencing self. This is the part of you that lives completely in the present moment. During that cold water experiment, it's the part of your brain that's screaming, "This is horrible, get me out of here." But then you have the remembering self. This is your inner storyteller. It's the one that looks back on what happened, edits it all down to a simple story, and, this is absolutely crucial, it's the one that makes the decision about what to do next time. And here's the kicker. These two selves value things in completely different ways. One of the biggest differences between them is that our remembering self is just awful at keeping track of time. It's a cognitive bias called duration neglect. What it means is that the actual length of an experience, say whether you go on a 1-week vacation or a 2-week vacation, has surprisingly little impact on how you remember it later. So if the duration doesn't really matter to our memory, what does? This brings us to the core concept, the thing that really unlocks this whole mystery, this sneaky way our memory edits reality. And here it is, the peak end rule. Our memory doesn't sit there with a calculator adding up all the bits of pain or pleasure. No way. It takes a mental shortcut. It just averages two key moments, the peak, so the most intense part, and the very end. Back in that cold water experiment, both trials had the exact same painful peak. But that longer trial had a slightly less painful ending. And that better ending completely changed the story that the remembering self told itself about the whole experience. I just love this quote because it nails the idea so perfectly. Our memory is not a continuous video recording of our lives. It's more like a photo album. It selectively saves a few snapshots of the most intense moments and of the final scene. And all the boring stuff in between, yeah, that mostly gets tossed out. Now, the peak end rule isn't just some weird one-off quirk. It's actually part of a much bigger system of mental shortcuts our brain uses all the time. And while they're often really useful, they can lead us to make some surprisingly irrational choices. Let me show you what I mean with another classic example. This one's called the Linda problem. I'm going to describe a person named Linda. Okay, here we go. Linda is 31, single, outspoken, and bright. She majored in philosophy, and as a student, she was deeply concerned with social justice and participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So just get a picture of her in your head. Got it? Okay. Now, based only on that description, I want you to make a quick gut judgment. Which of these next two options is more likely to be true? Is it A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? Now, if you're like most people, your brain probably jumped right to B. It just feels right, doesn't it? It fits the story, it matches the description of her we have in our heads. But logically, the answer has to be A. Think about it. The group of feminist bank tellers is entirely contained inside the bigger group of all bank tellers. It's a subset. So it is always, by definition, less probable for her to be in both categories than just one. This is a perfect illustration of how our intuition, our love for a good story, can completely steamroll simple logic. So the Linda problem is caused by something called the representativeness heuristic. We judge how likely something is based on how well it matches a stereotype in our head. And the second shortcut that's related here is recency bias, which is just our tendency to give more weight to recent events. This is exactly why the end of an experience is so powerful in our memory. I mean, think about a fantastic TV show that had a really terrible final season. That bad ending can completely ruin your memory of the entire series, right? That's recency bias at work. Okay, so now that we know how our memory gets tricked, we can actually start to use this knowledge on purpose. We can go from being victims of our biases to being the architects of our own experiences. And this is already happening all over the real world. In medicine, for example, doctors found that adding a few minutes of just minor discomfort to the end of a painful procedure actually makes patients remember it more positively and makes them more likely to return for checkups. And just look at IKEA. You think those cheap, delicious hot dogs at the exit are an accident? No way. It's a perfectly designed, positive ending to your shopping trip that makes sure you remember the whole thing fondly. It's the exact same reason a doctor gives a kid a lollipop after a shot. So, how can you use this in your own life? Well, for vacations, stop worrying about adding extra days. Instead, focus on planning one amazing peak experience and make absolutely sure the last day is relaxing and fun. For your workouts, if you actually want to stick to a routine, don't finish with a brutal all-out sprint. End with a nice, pleasant cool down. And hey, even for something like quitting a job, remember your last 2 weeks are the end of that story. That's what people will remember most vividly, so make it a good one. The big takeaway here is that we aren't just passive recorders of our lives. We are the storytellers. And those stories we tell ourselves are shaped not by how long things last, but by the highest peaks and, most importantly, by how they end. So the real question isn't just what you're going to experience next, but what memory you will choose to design.